Humans of the cardboard, welcome back to Just Nuts, guys. Today, we're not doing a tier list. I know I've got the tier maker up. Today, I'm actually doing somewhat of a counter to the best decks in the game kind of video. We're about to get Photon Hypernova. A lot of things are about to change. Some stuff changes with tier. Some, obviously, a newcomer in Kashtira. Sprite doesn't get that different, but it's still good to talk about him because I think at least until we get a ban list, Sprite's still going to be one of those best decks. Flu, of course, and then Branded also gets some new toys as well. To me, they are like the 5th best deck in the game after the other 4. Maybe even, like depending on how they perform this format, could even be argued to even go above Sprite and Flu, depending on some stuff there. But today, I've got 5 options for each of these 5 archetypes. Just some side deck, just potentially even main deckable cards that I just think are good counters to most of these decks. And long story short, I've been really looking at these decks, trying to figure out how to build main deck techs and side deck stuff for some of the decks I'm planning on playing going forward, because I'm going to need to be on point with this. So I've got 5 options for each archetype here, and we'll go through it. So let's start with tier. This is the most basic one to me, I think. Overall, first and foremost, you got to throw Dimension Shifter up here. We know Dimension Shifter cooks tier limit. Now, it is important to note that, like, I didn't put Kashtira tier on here. That version doesn't lose as hard to Shifter, but you are still turning off the whole tier side of the deck. So I still think it's good enough in the matchup. They just have a little bit more ways to kind of work around it and not get completely shut down by it, which is important to note. Next up, we got to throw Bistros. I still think Bistros are great against tier. There's an argument to play less, if not any, Bistros in the main going into this new format because of the introduction of Kashtira. I mean, look at these 5 decks. Obviously, Bistros, good versus tier. Bistros, solid versus Branded. Bistros versus Sprite, I mean, they're okay. And then you just have completely 2 dead matchups. I don't know if I want to main deck like cards that are going to be dead in 2 of the 5 matchups you're expecting to face the most of. So it's important to note. Next up here, kind of in line with Shifter, Dimensional Barrier. I don't have a ton of just like hard going first options here. I just don't tend to love those just generally when it comes to side decking and, like, you know, building counters to certain decks. Like Macro, right? It's just a little bit too slow. If you're going second, do I really want to set it into a tier board and activate it on the next turn? Whereas, you know, I just think I'd rather have cards that are either flexible, can go first or go second, or something that's more so going second, because inherently the game of Yu-Gi-Oh, if you lose the die roll, if you're just going second anyway, you're already at a disadvantage. So I would rather have cards to make up that gap than focusing more on the going first. But yeah, D-Fisher I think is just better because I can even going second activate it into a tier board, and now a lot of their stuff is turned off. If they're trying to MILF 3 with Havness on my turn, not going to work. If they're, you know, I mean, it doesn't kill everything because, like, if they already have stuff set up in Grave, obviously there's some workaround there, but it does turn off a lot of their grind game and a couple of their interruptions as well. I think it's good enough if you're playing a deck that doesn't care. Number 4, I've got the new triple tasking card. I'm going to let you know, I don't have tactics on here at all. I only have tasking in a couple of slots here because I think they just functionally work similarly, and I'm sure a lot of people end up playing both together anyway, where there's a lot of scenarios where you just go taskings, or thrust, I guess is the new name, into tactics, and then go from there. So really good card. Tier does so much stuff on your turn, from hand, from grave, from field, that it's so, they make this card live every single turn. So it's very, very powerful, of course. And the last card I have here is Lava Golem. I decided not to go Sphere Mode here just because Sphere Mode feels a little less reliable against tier. Like I said, because they do so much in grave and in hand, they don't always give you 3 monsters on field consistently for you to be able to make use of a Sphere Mode on them for. So I have Lava Golem here. Still think it's a really good card. It's not by card effect, so it's not triggering any tier names or anything, and just clears, you know, the core of their board, and then you just have to worry about the hand and grave stuff for the most part. So those are my 5 options for tier limit. Hopefully this is helpful to you. Moving on to, do we want to do Kashtira next? You know, let's do Sprite next. I think this Sprite's the next, like, basic one here. First, for Sprite, I have Dark Ruler no more. A lot of Sprite boards is going to be something like Elf. If it's a pure Sprite variant, it's going to be Elf plus Toad, sometimes a red or a carrot, and then maybe a smasher set, and then aside from that, it's just like hand traps on hand traps on hand traps, usually. Hopefully it's no more than 1 or 2 hand traps in those scenarios, but if you look at Dark Ruler, it's at least turning off both Toad negates, the Elf from getting them recursion or getting a Toad back, and a red or a carrot if it's on field. So I like this card a lot. It turns off so much of their board, and their stuff is smaller too. So even if you're not able to pop off like crazy, if you can just get enough bigger bodies on field, you can just walk over all their stuff. So I like Dark Ruler a lot. Next up, Artemis Slay I actually quite like in this matchup. One, this bounces totally awesome back to the extra deck instead of sending it to grave, so they don't get any recursion. It doesn't go to grave, so they're not getting another interruption from Elf. So just Elf is now just a follow-up card, really, more than anything now, not even an interruption. It's one card that handles both those. And you could also send something like the new Exceed that targets a card on the field and negates it till the end of the turn. If they had red or carrot, you could just negate that as well. So you could literally, with one card, handle both Toad negates plus the red or the carrot. And that's pretty dang good value overall, I would say. So yeah, very cool one there. There's also some potential to send the new Link monster and make use of that to bounce Elf. And then send Garura to draw a card, so with pretty much losing no hand advantage, you could out the Elf, so now you just have to handle the Toad and the rest of their stuff without having to worry about the recursion of Elf. That's kind of cool too. That's definitely another thing to look at. Next up, I've got Lava Golem again here. Where'd I put him? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm looking at the wrong side. Sphere mode. Like I said, their board is generally, if it goes off, 3 monsters at least. And there's even builds that will play 3 swaps, so that way they can summon the 3rd swap off of Toad in standby and stuff like that. So they do a good job at giving you material for it. Also, if you threaten the Elf, you can bait them to throw the Elf another body on field, and then give yourself wiggle room for sphere mode there as well. Very good. In the same vein, I also want to throw Cara. This is the first format where I actually think we will see consistent usage of Cara. This card's crazy. Elf uses effect on your turn. Toad, not as much. Like I said, some very specific variants might be firing Toad in standby to get another swap. I think that's pretty ill-advised for this upcoming format, but okay. But also, it's stuff like red. If they fire red or carrot, tributing, maybe they wouldn't tribute Toad, but if they fire it, boom, this is live. And just the fact that it comes out, bare minimum, a 3k beater is the biggest thing to me in this matchup. It's already clearing one body, and then it's coming out and clearing over another, and it's getting you value in the end phase. So really, really big card, I think, versus them, all things considered, which takes us to the last card. It's Taskings. I just told you about how they fire so many different monster effects on your turn. This card is always live. You just bait the Toad negates first, so that way this card is getting you your most powerful spells. Go from there. Let's move on. Fluanderies. Pretty boring, right? I agree. Dark Ruler. Turns off Barrier Statue plus M-Pen, and then from there, all you have to worry about is any potential non-engine cards they might have, as well as the trap. So as long as you can weather those, you are good. And it only takes 1 card, so that's pretty good versus them. From there, Lightning Storm. I like that. Well, one, Flunder doesn't really have a choice because they're a tribute deck. They're a normal summon deck. They never summon anything in defense position, really. So Lightning Storm is always live to do either or. You get to look at the rest of your hand, you get to look at what they set up on their first turn, and you get to pick what the best option would be. Go for the back row, bait out the trap early, clear the field spell so they're not able to grind as easily, or you're like, screw it, I have to out the Barrier Statue this way or I'm screwed. And then you handle the rest with the other 5 cards in your hand. Really cool. I think this card's pretty good in the matchup. Evenly as well is pretty good here. Why pick, one or the other when you can just force them to keep one thing, which probably would be the trap in most scenarios, I would guess. But you get to handle everything else. Same thing as Dark Ruler, except this also removes them. You just do lose your battle phase for this one, so keep that in mind as well. Joel and Locke. This is actually one of the few hand traps we actually have on the list here, aside from Bistrels and D-Shifter, which have been staples forever. Kind of new. This is really the only matchup in the meta, I think, right now that feels really strong for Droll. You just hit them on the Rabina, which means they don't get M-Pen, which means you are pretty much daring them. I dare you to have a tribute summon bird in hand, otherwise, your play is just doing nothing. Like, literally doing nothing. M-Pin's not getting them the trap for follow-up. They never get to any interruption anyway, and so they better have some non-engine interruption, or they are in a tough position. Not to mention, they like to play, like, not only the quick play spell that searches, but also like 2 different pots a lot of the time. So they've got a ton of cards that even before they commit Robina, they may not be able to search with Robina. So you're putting them on have another small bird and a big bird in hand, aside from Robina, after activating a card. So very, very powerful. I like Droll a lot there. And the last one here is Book of Eclipse. I think it's just pretty good. Kind of same thing as Dark Ruler, turns off the monsters. The whole plan is, if we're going to flip them face down, we're going to be able to then handle them immediately, clear those off the field, and hopefully have a hand that can play through the trap and non-engine stuff as well. I also like this card because it's first or second. Like, going first, you can just set this, and it's just another interruption for them. Once they get to some stuff, you flip them down. They can still tribute over the flipped down stuff, so just be careful with that. But you can let them get into everything and then flip their stuff face down. So they never actually like end on anything like too scary. And it gives you a chance to like work back into the duel. Just more flexible. I think it works out nicely that way. I like the card pretty well in the matchup. Moving to Branded. Branded gets a couple of new toys. I'm honestly not 100% sure how truly different they are right now. But we'll go through it. I think Bistros are pretty good, specifically with like stuff like Branded in red is almost always targeting a lighter dark engrave. In fact, I think like almost literally always. And so or just Bistros being able to hit those, jump on the board, get you more value, and do it turn after turn. So it just grinds with them and turns off that play pretty well. I think is decent. As far as actual interruption, it's just okay. But I think the overall value it gives you, I think, is good enough. Branded is an awkward deck, I have to say. It feels kind of weird. I also have Ultimate Slayer here. Fusion is the best extra deck type in the game for Ultimate Slayer. So when Fusion decks are good, Ultimate Slayer feels better. Now, tier, it's not super great because a lot of times, like, you want to send Intis, and, like, if I send Intis, like, what am I popping? The whole tier deck floats. So, like, in that specific instance, it's not as good. Whereas in this instance, I think it's a little bit better, being able to, like, send a Fusion to, like, bounce a Mirror Jade without it ever getting to activate its effect to, like, interrupt you, and then being able to, like, also pop a set card and, like, bait it out early if it's, like, Punishment or something like that. Or Banishment, sorry, not Punishment. And go from there. Pretty cool. From there, we move to Ash. Kind of funny, because Ash is definitely a more main deck card than side deck card for most people. But Branded, like, this is the only instance here, because, like, Sprite has multiple cards that you really want to Ash, but it's, like, so hard and they play through stuff. Ash is pretty good versus Flunder. I could have also tried to squeeze it in here. Kashtira, they have so many cards you want to negate, and Tyr, you have so many cards you want to Ash. But this deck has one very, very specific target that if they do not resolve Branded Fusion, they're not doing nearly as much anymore on that turn. So I think Ash is actually one of the best cards for Branded. If Tyr gets hit and Branded ends up sticking around as like a tier 1 threat, I do think Ash will increase in play. Because I think it's fine versus these decks. It's like the worst versus Tyr. It's fine versus these, but it'll be crucially important versus Tyr. Or Branded. I also like Cara. They end on big boss monsters that love to just activate their effects on your turn, stuff like Mirror Jade, and then follow that up by tributing 1 or 2 monsters, punching over another one, and then also getting something back on the end phase. I think it's pretty good. I haven't tested it enough to know for sure that I love it, but I like it, and I think that's good enough. The last card I actually have here is Imperm. I'm sorry. Imperm is... what? Yeah, I do have Imperm here. It's an interesting one. If you can't have Ash, or if you don't want to play Ash because it's not good enough against the rest of the format, I do think Imperm's decent here just because if you're not going to negate Branded Fusion, you can still at least negate whatever fusion they summon off of Branded Fusion, because usually they use that card to then fuse into like the actual end board pieces. So it kind of functions the same. I also love that if you're only going to hit them once, this is kind of almost the same. Not quite the same. They get a little further. They get a little more value out of Branded Fusion this way. But you also don't turn on something like Taskings or Thrust or Tactics or any other card that needs you to have activated a monster effect. And so I think that also is kind of one of the benefits here, because those look to be very, very popular cards going into the upcoming format. And then we get to the big one that we don't know as much about if you haven't been paying attention to the OCG. I'm still getting used to them. I'm not sure how ready I am, although usually I play decks that perform pretty well versus Flunder, and I think these are the most similar to each other, so hopefully I'll be in a good position. Book of Eclipse. The whole reason this card is probably going to see a good amount of play into this new format is Cara. It flips all their guys face down. It stops you. I believe it's going to cut them off from locking all your zones. It's going to turn off their guy that is a quick effect to banish anything on the field. And a lot of times they'll also have a Fenrir in that situation. So you're also turning off Fenrir's banish effect. So you are like turning off the 3 biggest interactions that their deck sets up for you all in one fell swoop. Now, it is important to note that you kind of need to clear that board. You're going to be in trouble if you're not going to be able to clear those because they already are pretty good at ending their turn with a lot of cards in hand. So if you do beat their board, they're going to have stuff to play into you, and we already know the Cara cards are pretty good going second. So you got to be ready for that. But I even think going first is pretty good as well, being able to flip something. Just like if they start their turn with a Fenrir, flip it down so it doesn't search. They don't get to interrupt the board breaking effect. And even if it flips up, they're only getting 1 draw off of it. I think that could be pretty good value, especially if it's locking the other Cara cards in their hand, like out from like being extenders. That could be really good. Nibiru. I don't know their combo like play for play just yet, but all I've heard is Nibiru cooks it. It loses to Nibiru. Nibiru is pretty poop versus most of the other stuff in the format. Some Sprite players will play right into Nibiru, but for the most part, if they know that you might be on it, they will play around it. Flu doesn't care. Branded might care sometimes if they extend far enough, but I don't think they have to. And then Tier, like, usually doesn't care that much either. It's sending stuff as effects, so like, what are you hitting anyway? Most of their interruptions are in like hand and grave anyway, whatever. But for this specific matchup, if you have a really bad Cara matchup, I would not be surprised to see a lot of players just tossing 3 Nib in the side. I also think Evenly's pretty good here. They end with at least 1 card in the back row, I believe, with, like I said, the 3 monsters on field, a Rise Heart, the Era, and I think Fenrir usually. So just saying pick 1, and then you go from there. 1 card, yes, you lose your battle phase to do it. That could be crucial depending on the kind of deck you're playing. But to be able to, pretty much take 3 cards with this 1, and then as long as you think you have enough rest left in your hand to handle the last card they choose is really, really nice. But again, you got to be ready for that pushback. Sphere mode, same idea, but you just hit all 3 monsters, I think. So, pretty cool. I think that's fine. And the last one is Tactics Thrust. The really important thing to note here is the Era, the 1xz that locks the zones. It also summons any Cara, from deck on standby. So a lot of times that's how they just get the extra Fenrir out for free, and it just makes this card live inherently, like every time. As long as they resolve their combo, they will make this card live. There's no, I need to play a little bit to bait out a monster interruption so that way it makes my stuff live. It's just live from the get-go. And they don't play negates like that, so then it is resolving, and you can potentially cook them. Get it evenly. Get a Dark Ruler to turn all that stuff off. Although, the Dark Ruler doesn't stop the board, the zone lock. It just turns off the other 2's interruptions. But still could be decent in certain scenarios. But yeah, there's some really powerful options you'll be able to get off of that. But yeah, those are my overall thoughts. Again, I'm just one guy. I'm not a super high-end meta player right now, but I am messing around with some rogue decks. I've been pretty excited specifically for what happens after the ban list, but I want to get started by being ready for what might happen, which is just Tier gets hit and everything else is fine. I still want to be ready for all of that. And we saw in the OCG, even if they hit Tier hard, a lot of hits, it still could function and still arguably be the best deck in the game. So we'll have to be ready for that. Here's just some of my thoughts here. Here's some options. I want to know your guys' thoughts down below. I only did 5 cards per archetype, but like some of this stuff is weird, right? Like Shifter and D-Fisher. Like if you play a deck that can't afford to lock itself out of the grave, you can't run with those. Lava Golem Sphere Mode. If your deck needs its normal summon, doesn't work there, right? There's a couple of these that just don't make a ton of sense for certain decks anyway, and so I'm definitely open to other suggestions. If you have anything here that you thought particularly stood out to you as something that I left off any of these specific matchups, I'd love to hear your thoughts down below, because I'm trying to get better for these upcoming formats too, and I think we can all just help each other here. So I'd love to hear your thoughts down below. Thank you so much for watching as always, guys. Subscribe for way more stuff from your boy down the line, and I'll catch you in the next video. Peace.